Friday evenings always bring me a sense of peace. Most of the week is behind me, and ahead lies the weekend, which I can spend alone in the quiet of my home with the books I have collected over the course of my 73 years. Time flows differently in retirement. After 43 years of service in the Morgantown District Court, where every day was filled with decisions that affected people's lives, the silence is sometimes deafening. But I have learned to appreciate it. I am spending this evening as usual, in my office where the walls are covered with memorable photographs and diplomas. Everything here reminds me of the past. The heavy oak desk where I studied hundreds of cases, the leather chair with worn armrests, the file cabinet with notes that I still keep, a judge's habit of recording facts. I flip through the pages of an old photo album that I don't take out very often. In a photo taken 25 years ago, Gloria and I are standing in front of our new house. She was 45 at the time, and I was 48. Ethan, our son, a 17-year-old teenager, reluctantly posed for the photographer, showing with his whole demeanor that he had more important things to do. Even then, he had this trait, the desire to appear more mature and significant than he really was. Gloria's photo stands on my desk in a small wooden frame that I carved myself after her death, one of the new hobbies I found to fill the void. In the picture, she is 65, a year before cancer took her. Her light graying hair is pulled back into a neat bun. Her intelligent eyes look slyly. The corners of her lips are slightly raised in a restrained smile. 5 years without you, old girl, I say to the photo, as I do almost every evening. I miss you. The silence in the house envelops me, becoming almost tangible. Sometimes I catch myself listening, waiting to hear Gloria's footsteps or the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Age, you know. The phone rings, interrupting my ritual. It's Patrick, a former assistant district attorney and now just an old friend. Milo, you old grump. His voice sounds cheerful, as always. You're not asleep yet? I'm not so ancient that I go to bed at sunset, I reply, smiling involuntarily. I saw your Ethan in court today. He won the Benson case. He's a clever lad, just like his father. He takes after his mother, I correct him. Gloria knew how to persuade. Ethan is my only son. At 42, he has achieved what I never dreamed he would. He's a lawyer with his own firm. I wanted a different fate for him, far from the justice system, which I knew from the inside with all its flaws. But he was stubborn. It's my choice, Dad, he said after graduating from high school, and I gave in, even though I could see how the system would crush his youthful idealism. And your daughter-in-law? Heather, I think? Patrick asks, and I wince involuntarily. Heather Huxley, now Barlow, came into my son's life 6 years ago, when Gloria was already seriously ill. She was a society columnist with ambitions that exceeded her talents and manners that couldn't fool someone who had been watching witnesses in court for 4 decades. Behind her flawless facade, fashionable clothes, a polished smile, sophisticated compliments, lay a calculating nature that I recognized from the moment we met. Don't judge her too harshly, Milo, Gloria pleaded. She just wants to impress. But I am a judge, a former one, but still. Evaluating people is my profession, and Heather Huxley did not pass my test. Same as always, I reply to Patrick, pretending to be a socialite. Aren't you being too harsh? I hear concern in my friend's voice. No, Pat, I just see right through her, and she sees right through me. Mutual antipathy, you know. After talking to Patrick, I pour myself a small glass of whiskey, one of the few habits I allow myself. Gloria never approved of my love of good scotch, but she never forbade it either. She understood that after days spent in the courtroom, I needed this little respite. The home phone rings, a rarity these days when everyone has switched to mobile phones. I keep a landline more out of stubbornness and habit. Dad, it's Ethan. My son's voice sounds formal, as if he were calling a client rather than his father. It wasn't always like that. Once, a long time ago, I was his hero. I remember how 5-year-old Ethan asked me to put on my judge's robe so he could show it to his friends. I remember him sitting in the empty courtroom after the hearings, imagining himself in my place. When did everything change? When did this wall of formality grow between us? Yes, Ethan, I'm listening, I reply, trying to keep my voice neutral. I have news, he continues in the same businesslike tone. I've been named senior partner at the firm. The official announcement will be next week on Thursday. Congratulations, I say sincerely. Despite our differences, I am proud of my son's success. You deserve this promotion. There is a pause on the line, and I hear a woman's voice in the background. Heather. Her intonation is unmistakable, melodic, but with subtle, commanding undertones. We're having a dinner to celebrate, Ethan says after a brief consultation with his wife. At the Blue Oyster, 7 o'clock on Thursday. Heather thinks you should come. It's an important event for our family. Heather thinks. Interesting wording. Not we would like you to come, but Heather thinks you should come. As if Ethan himself has no opinion on the matter. Or his opinion differs from his wife's, but he doesn't dare contradict her. Of course I'll come, I reply, hiding my surprise. I'm not usually invited to public events. Heather always found reasons why my presence was not necessary. It will be too noisy for you, Milo. You'll get tired, Milo. It's just boring talk about work, Milo. Great, Ethan sounds relieved, as if he expected me to refuse. The dress code is formal. And Dad, he pauses. Please try. He doesn't finish the sentence, but I understand what he means. Try to behave properly. Don't embarrass us with your blunt remarks. Don't ruin our reputation. Don't worry, son, I say with a hint of irony. I remember how to behave in polite company. After talking to Ethan, I sit by the fireplace for a long time, staring into the fire. The invitation surprised me. Something's not right here. Heather had never insisted on my presence at public events before. On the contrary, she had always tried to keep our communication to a minimum. 2 weeks ago, during their monthly visit, a tradition Ethan maintains more out of a sense of duty than affection, Heather barely exchanged a few formal phrases with me. She spent the entire visit buried in her phone, only occasionally looking up to cast an appraising glance at the decor of my home. Milo, don't you think it's time to redecorate? She asked then. This furniture looks so vintage. Coming from her, it sounded like an insult, as if anything connected to the past, to tradition, was unworthy of existence in her shiny new world. This furniture is older than you, Heather, I replied calmly. Like most things in this house, they hold our family's history. History is wonderful, she smiled her fake smile, but sometimes you have to move forward, don't you? Ethan sat between us, nervously tapping his fingers on the armrest of the chair. He always does that when he feels tense. It's a habit he's had since childhood. Dad values his things, Heather, he interjected. It's his house, his rules. She looked at her husband as if he had betrayed her by taking my side. Of course, dear, she said, emphasizing the last word. I'm just concerned about your father's comfort. At his age, comfort is especially important. At his age, another way of reminding me that, in her opinion, I already have one foot in the grave, that I am a relic of the past, an obstacle to her social advancement. Frankly, I don't understand what my son sees in this woman. Heather is beautiful, it's true, but her beauty is cold, calculating. She lacks the inner warmth that Gloria had, even in the darkest days of her illness. Maybe it's because after his mother died, Ethan was looking for someone to fill the void. Or is it that Heather knows how to manipulate people, playing on their weaknesses and insecurities? Or maybe it's just that my son has never been able to stand up to strong personalities. First me, now Heather. Two poles of his life, between which he is torn. Well, the invitation has been accepted. On Thursday, I will see them in their natural habitat, among the cream of Morgantown society, where Heather so desperately wants to establish herself. I wonder what role they have assigned me in this spectacle. Guest of honor? Or an exhibit to be shown off, like a curiosity from the past? I finish my whiskey and toss a log into the fireplace. The fire flares up with renewed vigor, casting whimsical shadows on the walls. In one of them, I think I see Gloria's silhouette, and for a moment I almost believe she is here with me. What advice she might give me on how to behave with my son and his wife, how to preserve what little remains of our family. But shadows are just shadows, and the dead don't give advice. I'll have to manage on my own, as I always have. The day of the gala dinner arrived sooner than I expected. I spent the morning rummaging through my wardrobe in search of a suitable suit. It's ironic that a man who has spent most of his life in a strict judge's robe has difficulty choosing clothes for a social event. My old charcoal suit still fits well, even though I've lost a little weight in recent years. Gloria always insisted that I have my suits made by a tailor rather than buying them off the rack. Milo Barlow, you're a representative of the law, not an insurance salesman, she would say. The memory made me smile. Gloria always cared more about my reputation than I did. I laid the suit out neatly on the bed, added a white shirt and a dark blue tie, understated but elegant. Nothing flashy. I'm not going to compete with the young people, but I don't want to look old-fashioned either. I still had a few hours before I had to leave, so I decided to spend them in my office, looking through old photos and documents. It wasn't that I was looking for anything in particular. Rather, I wanted to refresh my memory of certain moments from the past in order to better understand the present. Here's a photo taken on the day I was appointed district court judge. I was 30 at the time, and one of the youngest judges in Morgantown's history. Next to me is Gloria, then still Carmichael, my fiance. We got married a month after my appointment. She worked as a secretary in the prosecutor's office where we met. People said she married me because of my promising career, but they didn't know Gloria. She was too honest for such calculations. We were happy for the first 5 years. Then we started having trouble conceiving a child. Doctors, tests, procedures, all to no avail. Gloria fell into depression, and I immersed myself in work. We had almost drifted apart when a miracle happened. She got pregnant. Ethan was born when I was 36, the happiest day of my life. Here's a picture of 3-year-old Ethan on my shoulders. We're in the park, both laughing. I took a rare day off to spend time with my family. Gloria often reproached me for working too much, but I believed it was my duty to provide for my family. Besides, I really love my job. Administering justice, restoring fairness. What could be more important? I turned the page of the album, and Gloria's pale face in the hospital room stared back at me. Ethan was 8 at the time. Gloria underwent a difficult operation for breast cancer, the first round of her long battle with the disease. She won that battle, but the war continued for another 20 years, sometimes subsiding, sometimes flaring up with renewed vigor until it finally took her. A photo of Ethan's graduation. I'm standing next to him, both of us in suits, but there's an invisible wall between us. Gloria was in the hospital at the time and missed the ceremony. Ethan couldn't forgive me for not letting him postpone his college enrollment. Your mother wants you to continue living a normal life, I told him. Don't make her feel guilty for being sick. He left to study in Pittsburgh, returning only on weekends to visit his mother. He hardly spoke to me. I didn't blame him. Teenagers often clash with their fathers, especially with demanding ones like me. I flipped through a few more pages. Ethan with his law school diploma. Pride on his face, restrained approval on mine. I knew he had gone into law partly to spite me. He wanted to prove that he could succeed in my field, but in a different way. Not as a judge, a dispenser of justice, but as a lawyer, a defender. I'm going to help people, not judge them, Dad, he told me. I didn't keep the photos of his wedding to Heather, not because I disapproved of their marriage, although I did, but because in those pictures, Gloria and I looked like ghosts. She was exhausted by illness, and I was exhausted by worry for her. It was Gloria's last public appearance. 3 months later, she was gone. Closing the album, I looked at my watch. It was time to get ready. I took a shower, shaved carefully, and put on a fresh shirt. The suit fit perfectly as I expected. At the last moment, I decided to add cufflinks. A gift from Gloria on our 30th anniversary, gold with small sapphires. To remind you of my eyes, she said at the time. Looking at myself in the mirror, I was satisfied. My gray hair was neatly combed, my posture was straight, my gaze was clear. My age is noticeable, of course. Wrinkles, bags under my eyes. But overall, I looked dignified for my 73 years. I called a taxi, although I usually prefer to drive myself. But tonight might be a long night, and a glass of wine with dinner wouldn't hurt. Besides, parking in downtown Morgantown is a nightmare. The taxi arrived at 6:30 sharp. The young driver was polite and taciturn, which suited me perfectly. I'm not a fan of small talk with strangers. The ride to the Blue Oyster restaurant took about 20 minutes. This restaurant opened in Morgantown relatively recently, about 3 years ago. I had never been there, preferring more traditional establishments where I was known as a regular customer. Getting out of the taxi, I paused for a moment to study the restaurant's facade. A modern glass and metal building, blending in with the historic buildings of the city center. A typical example of a compromise between tradition and progress, not particularly successful, in my opinion. A young man in uniform stood at the entrance, checking the names of arriving guests against a list. I gave my name, and he checked his tablet. "Mr. Barlow, welcome. Your son and his wife have already arrived. Allow me to show you in." The restaurant's interior was decorated in blue and white tones, which is probably where the name came from. A huge aquarium with exotic fish took up an entire wall. Soft lighting, subdued music, snow-white tablecloths. Everything spoke of a claim to exclusivity. I immediately noticed Ethan and Heather. They were standing surrounded by a group of people at the bar. Heather was the center of attention. An elegant black dress, perfect hairstyle, bright makeup. She was saying something, gesturing animatedly, and everyone was listening to her with smiles. Ethan stood nearby, holding a glass of whiskey, his face expressing pride in his wife. I didn't rush to join them, preferring to observe from the sidelines at first. Heather was in her element, a social butterfly, flitting from one group of guests to another, showering them with compliments and laughing at their jokes. But I noticed what the others didn't. How her expression changed when she turned away from another conversation partner. How she appraised the outfits of other women. How she instantly shifted her attention from a less important guest to a more prestigious one. Ethan followed her like a satellite follows a star, allowing her to shine while remaining in the shadows. This was not like the son I knew. As a child, he always wanted to be the center of attention, to stand out. When did that change? When did he become a secondary character in his own life? Finally, Heather noticed me and whispered something to Ethan. He turned around, and a mixture of emotions flashed across his face. Joy, anxiety, uncertainty. They both headed toward me. "Father?" Ethan extended his hand for a formal handshake. "I'm glad you could make it." "I wouldn't miss such an important event," I replied, shaking his hand and looking him in the eye. "Milo," Heather offered her cheek for a kiss, which I performed politely but without enthusiasm. "You look remarkably well for your age." "And you look just the same as always, Heather," I replied with a smile. She tensed slightly but maintained her social smile. "Let me introduce you to our guests," she said, taking my arm. "There are so many interesting people here who would like to meet the legendary Judge Barlow." The legendary Judge Barlow. As if I were a museum exhibit, an ancient relic to be shown to visitors. But I decided to play along for now. The next hour was spent making introductions and engaging in small talk. Heather introduced me with exaggerated deference, talking about my achievements as a judge in the high-profile cases I had presided over. It would have sounded flattering if it weren't for the condescending tone in her voice, as if she were talking about a venerable but long-forgotten historical figure. I noticed how her behavior changed when a tall, graying man accompanied by a young blonde woman entered the restaurant. Heather instantly left me and rushed over to the new arrivals, radiating an enthusiasm I had rarely seen in her eyes. "Who is that?" I asked Ethan, who was standing next to me with a new glass of whiskey. "Robert Mortimer," he replied, lowering his voice, "editor-in-chief of the Morgan Herald. Heather hopes to get a job as a senior columnist for their Sunday supplement." I nodded. Now I understood why she was trying so hard to impress him. The Morgan Herald was the most influential publication in town. The position of columnist would be a significant promotion for Heather, an opportunity to expand her influence beyond the society pages. "And the girl with him?" "His daughter," Ethan said, taking a sip of whiskey. "She's studying for a master's degree in journalism. Heather hopes to take her under her wing." Take under her wing, in Heather's language, meant use her connection with her daughter to influence her father. I knew such schemes all too well from my experience as a judge. I continued to watch Heather charm Mortimer. Her laughter, her gestures, even her posture. Everything was designed to impress. She literally glowed with enthusiasm as she listened to him, as if he were saying the most interesting things in the world. Mortimer clearly enjoyed the attention of the attractive woman. His daughter stood nearby, smiling awkwardly and sipping champagne. I saw Heather periodically include her in the conversation, but always returned her attention to Mortimer. Ethan joined them, introduced himself, and shook hands. He looked confident and respectable, a successful lawyer, the husband of a beautiful woman, the host of the evening. But I noticed how Heather discreetly adjusted his tie, as if he were a child unable to dress himself, and how Ethan let her do it without protest. I was invited to the table and seated between an elderly partner at the law firm and the wife of one of Ethan's clients. Ethan himself sat at the center of the long table, with Heather next to him. Mortimer and his daughter were seated across from them, a strategic position for continuing the charm offensive. The dinner was exquisite. Seafood, as one would expect from the Blue Oyster. The wine was expensive but unremarkable. The conversation at the table flowed easily, with guests praising Ethan, congratulating him on his promotion, and discussing the firm's prospects. I mostly kept quiet, observing what was happening, especially Heather. She kept touching Ethan's hand, demonstrating the perfect marital relationship. She laughed at Mortimer's jokes. She engaged those who were left out in the conversation. The perfect hostess. But I saw something else. How she rolled her eyes unnoticed by the others when one of the guests said something she thought was stupid. How she ignored people she considered unimportant. How she manipulated the conversation, steering it in a direction that was advantageous to her. At one point, she caught my gaze and frowned slightly, as if dissatisfied with my watching her too closely. I raised my glass in a silent toast, and she quickly turned away, returning to her conversation with Mortimer. I knew she didn't want me there. But then why did she insist on my presence? What was she up to? This question haunted me all evening. The evening continued, and with each toast, with each course, the atmosphere became more relaxed. Waiters bustled between tables, refilling wine glasses and changing plates. Conversations grew louder, laughter more free. I sat sipping red wine and watching the guests with the professional interest that never leaves a judge, even after retirement. The habit of evaluating people, looking for inconsistencies in their words and behavior, is ingrained in my blood. Heather was in her element. Her eyes sparkled, her gestures became more expansive, her voice sounded confident and clear. She clearly made an impression on Mortimer, the influential editor she was so eager to charm. I saw him lean toward her to hear a joke, and his daughter look at Heather with ill-concealed admiration. Ethan also felt like the king of the evening. His promotion to senior partner was well-deserved. He really is a good lawyer, despite all my doubts about his choice of profession. I caught myself feeling proud of him. Perhaps that's what fatherhood is. A contradictory mixture of pride, disappointment, and the eternal feeling that you could have done more. After the main course, Mortimer tapped his fork on his glass to get everyone's attention. "Gentlemen," he began, rising from his seat, "I think now is the time for a toast to our new senior partner." Everyone fell silent, their eyes turning to the editor. Heather sat there literally glowing with pleasure, her hand resting on her husband's shoulder in a gesture that showed both support and possessiveness. "Ethan Barlow," Mortimer continued, "you embody what we value at Morganstown: hard work, determination, and an impeccable reputation. Under your leadership, your firm will become even more successful. I know I speak not only for myself, but for everyone here when I say we are proud of you." The guests raised their glasses and a chorus of "To Ethan" rang out. My son stood up to accept the congratulations, his face beaming with pride. "Thank you, Robert," he said when the applause died down. "Thank you, all of you. This evening means a lot to me. I would like to share this moment with the people closest to me." He looked at Heather, who was smiling at him with undisguised adoration. "My beautiful wife, without whose support I would never have achieved what I have today." Heather blew him a kiss, and the guests applauded. I nodded in agreement, although I knew that my words were more a tribute to politeness than a sincere acknowledgement. There was too much left unsaid between us, too many old grudges. After the toast, dessert was served, and the conversation resumed. I found myself drawn into a conversation with an elderly partner in the firm, Harrison Pierce, with whom I discovered we had mutual acquaintances in the judiciary. Our conversation about reforming the justice system attracted the attention of several guests sitting nearby. "The problem with modern justice," I said, encouraged by the interested audience, and, I admit, a couple of glasses of wine, "is that we have forgotten its true purpose. Justice should be blind to status and connections, but sighted to the essence of the matter." "I completely agree, Judge Barlow," Pierce nodded. But how do you feel about new technologies in the judicial process? Artificial intelligence for analyzing precedents. Virtual hearings. With caution, I replied. Technology can be a tool, but it cannot replace human understanding. The law is not an algorithm, but a living system based on the values of society. How typical of your generation, Milo. Heather's voice cut through the conversation like a knife through butter. She approached our group holding a glass of champagne, resisting progress to the bitter end. I felt myself tense up. Her tone was light, almost playful, but I detected a note of contempt. I'm not resisting progress, Heather, I replied calmly. I just believe that technology should serve human values, not replace them. Of course, she smiled her perfect smile. But sometimes old values need to be reevaluated, don't they? The world is changing. Some values are eternal, I objected. Justice, honesty, respect for the truth. Ah, truth. Heather made a theatrical gesture. Such a subjective concept. What was true yesterday may be a fallacy today. Isn't that right, Robert? Mortimer, who had joined our group, nodded, clearly flattered to be drawn into the discussion. In journalism, we deal with this all the time, he said. The truth is multifaceted. In journalism, perhaps, I agreed, but in court, there is only one truth. Guilty or not guilty. Such black and white thinking? Heather shook her head, addressing those around her. My father-in-law is the embodiment of his generation. No shades of gray. Several guests laughed, and I felt anger slowly rising inside me. Heather wasn't just arguing with me. She was portraying me as outdated, incapable of understanding the modern world. Unlike your generation, which has turned nuance into an art form of evading responsibility, I retorted. See? Heather addressed the guest with a feigned sigh. Any disagreement with him is immediately a moral failing. Classic tactic. Heather, Ethan intervened, approaching us. I think we've all gotten a little carried away. Oh, I'm just showing our guests what interesting discussions we have in our family, she said without losing her smile. It's not every day you get to argue with a real old school judge. It's like living history. The laughter grew louder, and I noticed that now everyone was looking at me as if I were some kind of artifact, an amusing exhibit from a museum. You know, Heather continued, turning to Mortimer, sometimes I write down Milo's comments. They're so colorful. Maybe someday it will be material for my column. Wisdom of a bygone era. Heather, Ethan said warningly, but she was too absorbed in her game. I always tell Ethan that he should appreciate the opportunity to talk to his father while he's still, well, you know, she tapped her temple with her finger, remembers everything. That was too much. Hinting at my senile dementia in front of all these people. I could put up with the mockery of my views, but this... I remember everything perfectly well, Heather, I said, straightening up, including things you'd rather forget. She froze for a moment, and I saw a shadow of concern in her eyes. What are you talking about, Milo? She asked, trying to keep her tone light. Your career before Morgantown, for example, I said, feeling the words spill out. That little scandal in Pittsburgh, after which you had to change not only your job, but also your last name. Heather's face paled, and she clutched her glass so tightly that I was afraid it would crack. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice had lost its confidence. Really? I turned to Mortimer. Haven't you heard about it, Robert? That's strange because it was a high-profile case. Heather Landon, a young, ambitious journalist, she went by that name at the time, fabricated an interview with the senator's wife, inserting some very juicy details about their family life. The scandal broke when the senator and his wife took the newspaper to court. The newspaper had to pay a large settlement, and Heather decided to start over. New city, new name. Huxley instead of Landon. Very convenient. A dead silence fell. All eyes were on Heather, who stood as if struck by lightning. I had known about this incident for a long time. Judges have their sources. But I never mentioned it, respecting a person's right to a second chance. But today she crossed the line. That's a lie, Heather said, her voice trembling. Vile slander. The Pittsburgh court has a complete file on this case, I said calmly. Journalistic fraud is a serious charge, but you got lucky. The newspaper chose to hush up the case by quietly firing you. Dad! Ethan approached me, his face contorted with anger. What are you doing? Telling the truth about your wife, son, I replied, meeting his gaze. The truth she hid from you and everyone else in this town. Heather suddenly burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. It was a well-calculated performance. I had seen enough fake tears in my judicial career to recognize them. How could you, she sobbed, on such an important night for your son? You deliberately want to ruin our lives. Mortimer looked shocked. The editor's daughter turned away awkwardly, and the other guests began to whisper. The festive atmosphere was hopelessly ruined. You're crossing the line, Ethan said, his voice ringing with rage. You've always hated Heather, but this is unacceptable. I don't hate her, Ethan, I said wearily. I just see right through her, and it hurts me that you don't. Shut up, Ethan shouted, and the guests gasped in surprise. You've always been like this with all my decisions, with everything that's important to me. Always judging, always finding fault. Nothing has changed since I was a child. Ethan, No, he raised his hand, stopping me. Not another word. You didn't come here to support me. You came here to ruin everything, like always. Heather continued to cry, now on his shoulder, and Ethan hugged her, stroking her back comfortingly. I thought, he said, looking at me bitterly, that we could put the past behind us, that you could just be happy for me, for us. But I was wrong. I could see the pain behind his anger, the pain of a little boy who always wanted his father's approval and never got enough of it. I wanted to tell him that I was proud of him, that I had always loved him, but the words stuck in my throat. From this day forward, Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm, you are not my father. Get out. And don't try to contact me or Heather. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. I stood there, stunned, unable to believe that my only son had just publicly disowned me. Ethan, you can't be serious, I finally said. I sure as hell am, he replied. Go away, Milo, just go. Heather lifted her tear-stained face from his shoulder and looked at me. And in that moment, for a split second, I saw not pain or fear in her eyes, but triumph. She had won. She had finally achieved what she wanted, a complete rift between me and my son. I slowly scanned the room. The faces expressed a mixture of shock, confusion, and awkwardness. No one looked me in the eye except Heather, whose triumphant gaze turned to feigned pity as soon as she noticed me looking at her. Poor Milo, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Age is taking its toll. Such paranoia. I turned and headed for the exit, feeling the eyes of everyone present on me. As I passed the bar, I heard Heather say to someone, he was always a difficult person, but now he's completely given up. We wanted to put him in a good nursing home, but he's so stubborn. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. My head was spinning, not from the wine, but from the realization of what had happened. My son had disowned me. Heather had gotten her way. She had completely taken control of him, cutting off his last connection to the past. But if she thought the old judge would give up so easily, she didn't know me very well. In my career, I've seen many like her. Manipulators, liars, people willing to do anything to further their ambitions. And I've learned how to deal with them. I didn't know what I was going to do then, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I would give them time to enjoy their imagined victory. And then Heather Barlow would learn what it really means to cross Judge Milo Barlow. With that thought in mind, I walked through the night streets of Morgantown, feeling my determination to restore justice grow stronger with every step. I returned home well after midnight. The walk through Morgantown calmed my thoughts, but it did not extinguish the fire that burned inside me. Each step along the familiar streets, past the buildings where I had administered justice for nearly 4 decades, strengthened my resolve. My house greeted me with silence and darkness. I didn't turn on the light in the hallway, preferring to move around by touch like a ghost. In the living room, I poured myself a whiskey, not to drown my sorrows, but to clear my head. It's a strange paradox. A little alcohol always helped me think more clearly, especially in difficult cases. Sitting in an armchair by the unlit fireplace, I mentally returned to the events of the evening. Ethan's face distorted with anger and disappointment, Heather's theatrical tears, the triumph in her eyes when she realized she had gotten her way, the confused looks of the guests, their whispers behind my back. From this day forward, you are no longer my father. Those words echoed in my head, causing more pain than I could have expected. I thought I was ready for this, that the alienation between us was already so great that a formal break would not matter. I was wrong. A sip of whiskey burned my throat. I looked at Gloria's photo on the mantelpiece. "What would you do now, old lady?" I asked the silent picture. "You were always wiser than me in these matters." Gloria would probably have found a way to reconcile Ethan and me. She knew how to smooth things over and find compromises. But Gloria is gone, and I am left alone with my pride and my pain. I didn't notice how I fell asleep in the chair. I woke up with the first rays of the sun, with a stiff neck and the clarity that comes only after a night of deep reflection. I knew what I had to do. After a shower and a cup of strong coffee, I sat down at my old desk and took out a notebook, another habit I had retained from my days as a judge. I always wrote down my thoughts on difficult cases, systematized the facts, and built logical chains. First, I listed what I knew for sure. Heather Landon, now Huxley Barlow, had been fired from a Pittsburgh newspaper for fabricating interviews. She changed her last name and moved to Morgantown, where she started her career over. There she met Ethan, married him, and now methodically cuts him off from his past, especially from me. But why? What motivates her? Simple dislike of me does not explain such a deliberate strategy. There must be something else. I put down my pen and thought. Heather is ambitious, that much is clear. She wants to climb the social ladder and establish herself in Morgantown's high society. Marrying a successful lawyer, the son of a respected judge, is part of that plan. But with my straightforwardness and ability to see through people, I pose a threat to her. I could destroy the image she has so carefully crafted. And last night, she provoked me into doing just that, publicly exposing her past. A clever move. Now, any further attempts on my part to reveal the truth about her will be perceived as a personal vendetta by a rejected father rather than as facts. I returned to my notes. What else do I know about Heather? Her work at the Morgan Herald consists of society columns, interviews with local celebrities, and reviews of cultural events. Nothing serious, but her articles are popular. She knows how to present the material in a way that intrigues the reader and creates a sense of involvement in the lives of the elite. But how does she get the information for her articles? I had never asked myself that question before. Given her past in Pittsburgh, it's safe to assume that not all of her methods of gathering information are ethical. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Patrick Donovan, my old friend, a former assistant district attorney and now a legal consultant. "Milo?" Patrick's voice sounded surprised. "Are you okay? I heard about yesterday." "News travels fast," I said, not surprised. Morgantown is a small town, especially in circles close to law and journalism. "I hear you and Ethan," Patrick hesitated, "that you've had a serious falling out." "That's right," I confirmed, "but that's not why I'm calling. I need your help, Pat." "Anything, old man." His voice sounded genuinely concerned. "What do you know about Heather Barlow and her work at the Herald?" Patrick paused for a second. "Not much. She writes society columns and does interviews. I've read a couple of her articles. Nothing outstanding, but the public likes them." "What about her methods?" I pressed. "How does she get the information for her articles, especially the juicy details they're full of?" "Well," Patrick drawled, "there are rumors. But they're just rumors, Milo." "I'm listening." "They say she'll stop at nothing, flirting with sources, making promises she has no intention of keeping. Sometimes outright blackmail. That matched my suspicions. But I needed facts, not rumors. Pat, I need information about her past in Pittsburgh, everything you can find, and about her current job too." "Milo," Patrick's voice became serious, "I understand that you're upset about the breakup with your son, but revenge is not the answer." "It's not revenge," I objected, even though my inner voice whispered the opposite. "It's a precaution. I want to know who I'm dealing with." Patrick sighed. "Okay, I'll see what I can do, but promise me you won't take any rash action." "I promise," I said, knowing that this promise might be difficult to keep. After talking to Patrick, I called a few more former colleagues. James Holden, the former police chief of Morgantown, who had been my friend for 30 years. Susan Wright, the judge who had replaced me after I retired. Richard Ford, a lawyer I had often faced in court. We were adversaries, but we respected each other. I didn't tell them directly why I needed information about Heather. I hinted at concern for my son, at a desire to make sure he was okay. They understood that I wasn't telling the whole truth, but our long-standing friendship and professional respect outweighed their doubts. By noon, I had gathered enough information to begin to form a more complete picture. A call from Patrick confirmed my worst suspicions. "Milo, I found something interesting," he said. "That case in Pittsburgh wasn't the only one. Before that, she worked in Philadelphia, and there was a scandal there too. Not as high profile, but similar. Manipulation of facts, distortion of quotes." "And she changed her name again?" I asked, taking notes. "Yes. In Philadelphia, she was Heather Grant. Then she became Landon in Pittsburgh, now Huxley in Morgantown. She systematically changes her identity, starting with a clean slate every time her methods come to light." This was valuable information. Heather wasn't just a journalist with a single blemish on her record. She was a serial imposter, changing names and cities to avoid the consequences of her actions. "What about her current job?" I asked. "That's more complicated," Patrick said. "But I spoke to a couple of people at the Herald, on condition of anonymity, of course. They confirmed that some of her methods are questionable. She uses personal relationships to obtain information and sometimes distorts the facts to make them more sensational. But it's hard to prove. She's careful." "Has anyone filed a complaint against her?" "Not officially, no. But there have been threats. Once, the husband of one of her heroes threatened to sue for misrepresenting his wife's words. The case was hushed up, and the article was edited in the online version. But the paper copies remain, and the difference is obvious." I made a note of it. "This could be useful." "There's something else," and Patrick continued. "She's working on a big story right now, something to do with the city administration and land distribution. Potentially explosive stuff. That caught my attention. Land in Morgantown has always been a bone of contention. The city is growing, land values are rising, and corruption inevitably arises around that. Is she digging into anyone in particular?" I asked. "Rumor has it, the deputy mayor, Michael Prescott, but that's unofficial." Michael Prescott. I knew him, a young, ambitious politician, rumored to be a possible candidate for mayor in the next election. If Heather was really gathering dirt on him, it could be serious. After talking to Patrick, I made a few more calls. By evening, the picture had become even clearer. Heather wasn't just writing a society column. She was systematically gathering information about influential people in Morgantown. Not always for publication, often just for her personal archive. A kind of insurance or leverage, if needed. James Holden, the former police chief, told me a particularly interesting detail. "She was seen several times in the company of Eric Malone," he said. That name made me sit up and take notice. Eric Malone is a private investigator with a dubious reputation. Rumor had it that he was involved not only in spying on unfaithful spouses, but also in more serious matters: wiretapping, hacking email, gathering compromising information. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Absolutely." My former colleague saw them together in a cafe outside the city. They clearly didn't want to be seen together. This confirmed my suspicions about Heather's methods. She didn't limit herself to conventional journalistic investigation. She used questionable, possibly even illegal means to obtain information. By nightfall, I had gathered enough material to begin forming a plan of action. On my desk lay records of Heather's past in 3 cities, her methods at the Morgan Herald, and her connections to shady characters like Malone. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the results of my investigation. Information is power, especially information like this. But how could I use it most effectively? I could simply pass on everything I had learned to the Herald's editor, Robert Mortimer. But Heather had probably already turned him against me after yesterday's scandal. Besides, without direct evidence, based only on rumors and anonymous testimony, my accusations would look like an attempt at revenge. No, I needed a more subtle approach. Something that would force Heather to reveal her true nature herself. Something that would open Ethan's eyes to who his wife really is. I looked at my notes again. The land scandal Heather was digging into now might be the key. If I could find out what exactly she was investigating and how she was getting her information. I picked up the phone and dialed Richard Ford's number. As a lawyer, he often worked with the city administration and might know details about the land deals Heather was interested in. "Richard, it's me again," I said when he answered. "Sorry for calling so late." "No problem, Milo. How can I help you?" "I need information about land deals overseen by Deputy Mayor Prescott, especially those that might be of interest to journalists." Ford paused. "This has to do with your daughter-in-law, right?" he finally asked. "Yes," I didn't deny it. "I want to know what she's working on." "Milo," Ford's voice became serious, "I understand how you feel, but interfering with her investigation could be dangerous, not only for your relationship with your son, but for you personally. If she's really digging into Prescott, there could be some serious people involved." "I just want to know the facts," I insisted. "I won't do anything rash." Ford sighed. "All right, there is one deal that raises questions. A plot of land on the outskirts of town, not far from the new shopping center. It was sold at a low price to Western Development. A month later, it was resold at a huge profit. And Prescott has something to do with it? There's no direct evidence, but there are rumors that he has a stake in Western Development through front men." It sounded like exactly the kind of thing that would interest a reporter digging into the deputy mayor. "Thanks, Richard. That's very helpful." "Be careful, Milo," he warned. "Your sister-in-law is playing with fire, and you could get burned if you get too close." I assured him I would be careful and ended the conversation. Then I sat for a long time, looking at my notes, thinking about my next steps. A plan began to form in my head. Not a direct confrontation. No, that had already proven ineffective. Instead, a subtle game, using Heather's own weapons against her. Information and manipulation. Step 1. Find out all the details about the land deal and Heather's investigation. Second, find a way to steer her investigation down a path that would ultimately lead to her own exposure. Third, ensure that Ethan saw his wife's true colors, with no way to deny the obvious. I closed my notebook and glanced at my watch. It was well past midnight, but I didn't feel tired. On the contrary, I was filled with an energy I hadn't felt in a long time. The energy of the pursuit of justice, the very feeling that had driven me throughout my years as a judge. Heather Barlow would soon learn what it meant to have as an enemy a man who had dedicated his life to restoring justice. And this time, I would not be limited by the confines of the judicial system. A week had passed since that fateful evening at the restaurant. A week during which I had not received a single call or message from Ethan. A complete break, just as he had promised. I did not try to contact him, knowing that any attempt on my part would be met with hostility. Heather was surely reinforcing his determination not to communicate with me by painting me in the darkest colors. I could only imagine what stories she was telling him, what fears she was fueling. But I wasn't sitting idle. Over the course of that week, my investigation into Heather's activities had progressed significantly. I had compiled an impressive dossier that included not only her past misdeeds in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, but also evidence of her questionable methods at the Morgan Herald. Information about her collaboration with private investigator Malone proved particularly valuable. James Holden, an old friend of mine from the police force, was able to provide me with photographs of their meetings, taken as part of a completely different investigation. Malone had long been under surveillance as a person involved in illegal information gathering, and Heather had been careless enough to meet with him in places that the police periodically monitored. But the most interesting thing I learned was about Ethan's law firm's clients. Richard Ford, a fellow lawyer, shared information that in recent months the firm had taken on several questionable cases, defending companies involved in environmental violations, tax schemes, and labor disputes. "That's not like Ethan," Ford told me during our meeting at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. "He's always been selective about his clients, but lately, it seems that financial considerations have outweighed ethical ones. Or someone has influenced his decisions," I remarked. Ford nodded. "Rumor has it that it was his wife's initiative. She convinced him that the firm needed to grow more aggressively, take on more lucrative cases, regardless of the reputational risks." That sounded like Heather. For her, status and money had always been more important than reputation and principles, and she had gradually imposed those values on Ethan. I decided to start with that. My first step was a cautious one, an anonymous call to the editorial office of the Morgantown Defender, the Herald's main competitor, where Heather worked. I contacted a journalist known for his investigations in the field of business and law. I have some information that might interest you, I said, changing my voice, about the Barlow law firm and some of their clients. Who are they? The reporter asked cautiously. That's not important. What's important is what I know about the cases they're handling and how they were obtained. I shared information about the firm's two most questionable clients, a chemical company accused of dumping waste into a river and a construction corporation that used illegal workers. I didn't mention my connection to Ethan. Let the journalist do his own investigation and draw his own conclusions. If that's true, it's explosive material, said the journalist, but I need proof. Dig for yourself, I replied. Start by checking the court documents in the case of Chemtech versus the Environmental Committee. Pay attention to the witness testimony and expert opinions that Barlow's firm is trying to exclude from consideration. After that conversation, I went to the office of Robert Mortimer, editor-in-chief of the Morgan Herald. We weren't close, but as a respected former judge, I could count on a meeting without an appointment. Mortimer's secretary recognized me and, after a brief phone call with her boss, showed me into his office. Judge Barlow. Mortimer rose from his desk and extended his hand. What a surprise. To what do I owe the honor? I shook his hand and sat down in the chair he offered me. Robert, I'm here about a sensitive issue, I began without preamble. It concerns professional ethics in journalism. Mortimer tensed slightly. As an editor, he was naturally sensitive to questions of ethics, especially when raised by someone as respected as myself. I'm listening carefully. There is a journalist working for your newspaper who uses unethical and possibly illegal methods of gathering information. I'm talking about Heather Barlow. Mortimer leaned back in his chair, his face impenetrable. That's a serious accusation, Judge. Do you have any evidence? Yes, I said, taking an envelope with copies of photos of Heather's meetings with Malone out of my briefcase and placing it on the table. Eric Malone is known to the Morgantown police as a person involved in illegal information gathering, wiretapping, mail hacking, surveillance. Your employee meets with him regularly in places where it is difficult to see them together. Mortimer studied the photos carefully, his face remaining impassive. Meeting with an informant is not a crime, Judge Barlow. Journalists work with various sources. Of course, I agreed. But what concerns me is not the fact of the meetings, but their context. Malone is not just an informant. He obtains information through illegal means. And if Heather uses this information in her articles, it exposes the newspaper to the risk of lawsuits, Mortimer finished for me. I understand your concern. There are other aspects, I said, taking out another envelope. Here are copies of Heather's articles published in the Herald and statements from the people she allegedly interviewed. Note the discrepancies. Some of the quotes are completely fabricated. Mortimer took the envelope but did not open it. Judge Barlow, I appreciate your concern for our newspaper's reputation, but I can't help but note that after your incident with Heather and your son at dinner, your objectivity may be in question. I expected this. Of course, Heather had already presented her version of events to him. I understand your doubts, I said calmly, but the facts remain the facts, regardless of my personal relationship with Heather. Check the information yourself. Talk to the people whose words she distorted. Study her methods. I came to you not out of revenge, but out of respect for journalistic ethics in your newspaper. Mortimer tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. I'll conduct an internal investigation, he said finally. Confidential. If your allegations are confirmed, action will be taken. If not, he left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. That's all I ask, I said, getting up. And Robert, I hope this conversation stays between us. Of course, he nodded, walking me to the door. I appreciate your concern, Judge Barlow, even if I don't entirely share your suspicions. I left the newsroom feeling that the seed of doubt had been sown. Mortimer was an experienced editor. He couldn't ignore such accusations, especially when backed up by evidence. Even if he doubted my motives, he had a duty to check the facts. The next step in my plan was to spread the word about Ethan's firm's questionable clients among the Morgantown legal community. I didn't want to damage my son's reputation directly, but I felt it was necessary for his competitors to know about the risky path he had taken under Heather's influence. I met with Susan Wright, the judge who had replaced me after my retirement, in an informal setting, over lunch at a quiet restaurant on the outskirts of town. Susan had always respected me as a mentor and valued my advice. Susan, I'm concerned about the court's reputation, I told her after a casual conversation about current affairs. I've heard that some lawyers, in their pursuit of clients, are starting to use questionable defense tactics, especially in cases involving environmental and labor violations. Do you have anyone specific in mind? She asked bluntly. No, I lied. Just a general trend. But I heard that my son's firm is defending Chemtech. Will you be handling that case? Yes, I'm working on it, Susan nodded. What concerns you? Nothing specific. I tried to sound casual. It's just strange that Ethan took it on. It's not like him to defend a company that is clearly guilty of polluting the river. Susan looked at me intently. Milo, you're not telling me something. You know I can't discuss cases I'm working on. Of course, I said, raising my hands conciliatorily. I'm just sharing an observation, and I hope the court will pay special attention to the evidence in this case. They say the testimony of the coastal residents is very convincing, although the defense is trying to discredit it. Susan frowned. Milo, you know I can't. Of course, I interrupted her. Let's change the subject. How's your daughter? She got into law school, right? The conversation moved on to more neutral topics, but I was sure I had planted a seed of doubt in Susan's mind. She was an experienced judge and understood that I would not have brought up the issue without reason. The next day, I accidentally ran into Gregory Schneider, the managing partner of a major rival law firm, at the club where I played chess every Wednesday. Gregory, I pretended to be surprised to see him. What a surprise. Would you like to join the game? Schneider wasn't the best chess player, but he loved the game and rarely turned down an offer. With pleasure, Judge Barlow. During the game, as I had planned, the conversation turned to business. I hear your firm is representing the Environmental Safety Association in the case against Chemtech? I asked casually, making a move with my knight. Yes, Schneider frowned, studying the board. It's a tough case. Chemtech has a powerful defense. My son's firm, I nodded. A bit of a strange choice for Ethan. I thought he was more selective about his clients. Schneider looked up from the board. Do you think so? Between you and me, I lowered my voice. I heard that the decision was made under pressure from his wife. She's ambitious, and money means more to her than reputation. Interesting. Schneider made a move, clearly distracted from the game. What do you know about the defense strategy? Nothing specific, I shrugged casually. Ethan and I don't discuss his cases, but I know they're trying to discredit the contamination witnesses. They're looking for something in their past that can be used against them. That's standard tactics, Schneider remarked, but I could see that the information interested him. Perhaps, I agreed. But in this case, I've heard that they're hiring private investigators to gather compromising information on the witnesses. That crosses the line of ethical defense, don't you think? Schneider nodded, his gaze becoming thoughtful. If that's the case, then yes. But where did you get that information? An old judge has his sources, I smiled and made my decisive move. Checkmate, Gregory. Schneider looked distractedly at the board, clearly thinking about something else. You've given me food for thought, Judge Barlow, and not just in chess. Glad to help, I began arranging the pieces for a new game. Another one? But Schneider declined, citing his work. I knew he was in a hurry to get back to the office and rethink his strategy in the case against Chemtech based on the information he had received. A few more days passed, and I began to see the first results of my actions. The Morgantown Defender published an article about certain law firms in the city that take on clients with questionable reputations. Ethan's firm was not named directly, but several hints made it recognizable to those in the know. Through my sources, I learned that Mortimer had launched an investigation into Heather's work practices at the Morgantown Herald. He didn't fire her, but rumor has it that he gave her a serious warning and removed her from the major story she was working on, the investigation into Deputy Mayor Prescott's land deals. I followed the developments from my home, not getting directly involved, but ready to add fuel to the fire if necessary. That moment came when Patrick called me. Milo, he said without preamble, your son is in trouble. What happened? I tensed up. The Chemtech trial. Judge Wright denied the defense's motion to exclude testimony. What's more, she made a comment to Ethan about his methods of handling evidence. A serious comment? Serious enough to affect his reputation. She practically accused him of trying to manipulate the court. I felt a pang of conscience. I didn't want to damage my son's professional reputation that badly. What about Heather? I asked, changing the subject. Oh, that's more interesting, Patrick said with a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Mortimer has taken her off all the important assignments. Now she only writes about flower shows and charity dinners. They say she's furious. Does she know the reason? Officially, it's a review of editorial policy. Unofficially, Mortimer discovered that some of her sources were highly questionable and that her methods of gathering information could expose the newspaper to lawsuits. I nodded with satisfaction, although Patrick couldn't see it over the phone. And how is she reacting? Violently. She made a scene in the newsroom and threatened to quit, but Mortimer was adamant. What about Ethan? Does he know about his wife's problems? Surely the whole town is talking about it. I imagined Heather and Ethan discussing their sudden professional problems, unaware of their true source. They probably think it's just a coincidence or the result of jealous competitors. Heather may even blame me, but without evidence, it would seem like paranoia, especially to Ethan. Thanks for the information, Pat, I said. Keep me posted if you find out anything else. After talking to Patrick, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking. The plan was working better than I had expected. Ethan and Heather's professional reputations were beginning to suffer. But that wasn't enough. I wanted Ethan to see his wife's true colors, to realize that she was manipulating him, using him to achieve her own goals. And for that, I needed to take the next step. Something that would force Heather to reveal her true nature so clearly that even Ethan, blinded by love, would not be able to ignore it. 2 weeks of my quiet war against Heather, and, indirectly, Ethan, bore fruit I hadn't even expected. Like a stone thrown into water, my actions caused ripples that spread wider and wider, affecting more and more aspects of their lives. Ethan lost the Himtech case. The company was found guilty of polluting the river and fined a large sum. Moreover, Judge Wright made a special note in her ruling about the defense tactics, which she said balanced on the edge of professional ethics. This was a serious blow to Ethan's reputation in Morgantown legal circles. Heather fared even worse. After an internal investigation initiated by Mortimer, her position at the Morgan Gazette became precarious. She was stripped of her column in the Sunday edition, reassigned to covering minor events, and, according to rumors, placed on probation. Her meteoric rise came to an abrupt halt. However, the most significant blow to both of them was social isolation. Morgantown is a small town where reputation is everything. Rumors of Ethan's professional failures and Heather's questionable work methods quickly spread in the upper echelons of society, where they had worked so hard to establish themselves. Invitations to parties became less frequent, phone calls shorter, and friends and partners began to keep their distance. I watched all this from afar, receiving information through my network of contacts. Patrick, Ford, Holden, Wright, all of them, without knowing it, were part of my plan, passing me news of Ethan and Heather's downfall. However, I knew that my revenge would not be complete until they knew who was behind their misfortunes, until they realized that the old judge they had so contemptuously dismissed was still capable of restoring justice. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. Patrick told me about an upcoming charity evening in support of the city hospital, an annual event attended by the entire Morgantown elite. Ethan and Heather were on the guest list. They donated significant sums to such events in an effort to bolster their social status. You've been invited too, Milo, Patrick told me, as an honorary citizen of the city and a former judge. Are you going to attend? I think so, I replied after a moment's thought. It's been a while since I've been out in public. Ethan and Heather will be there too, Patrick warned. Aren't you afraid of an awkward encounter? Awkward for whom? I smiled. I think my son and daughter-in-law will find a way to avoid direct contact with me. I'm not so sure, Patrick said. They haven't been in the best position lately. People are saying... What are they saying? I pretended not to know. That Ethan is losing clients after losing the Himtech case. That Heather is on the verge of being fired from the Herald. They're not as popular in society as they used to be. I'm sorry to hear that, I sighed hypocritically. But as my late wife used to say, fate often teaches us lessons that we refuse to learn voluntarily. The charity evening was to take place in the main hall of the City Hall, a historic building in the center of Morgantown, where all significant city events were held. I prepared thoroughly, I ordered a new suit from the best tailor in town, polished my judge's medal, which I was entitled to wear at official events, and even visited the barber, a luxury I had rarely allowed myself in recent years. The evening was clear and cool. I arrived at City Hall by taxi shortly before the event began. A crowd of well-dressed people had already gathered at the entrance, greeting each other with the special warmth that only public events can bring. I spotted Ethan and Heather right away. They were standing a little apart from the main group, talking to an elderly couple. I think it was the hospital's chief physician and his wife. Heather looked impeccable as always in an elegant dark blue dress, but I noticed the tension in her posture, in the forced smile. Ethan next to her looked tired, his usually perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled, as if he hadn't paid enough attention to his appearance. They didn't notice me, and I didn't draw their attention. The time had not yet come. I entered the hall nodding to acquaintances, shaking hands with former colleagues, accepting compliments on my appearance. "Milo, you look splendid," exclaimed Eleanor Pritchard, the widow of the former mayor and a well-known city philanthropist. "That suit suits you very well." "Thank you, Eleanor," I said gallantly, kissing her hand. "You look stunning today as well." "Oh, you've always been such a gentleman," she patted my arm. "How are you? We so rarely see you at events like this." "I prefer a quiet life," I replied with a smile, "but today's cause is worth coming out of seclusion for. Our hospital needs support." "Absolutely," she agreed. "By the way, I heard about your disagreement with your son. Such a pity. He's here today, you know?" "Yes, I saw him and his wife at the entrance," I nodded. "But I don't think we'll be talking. Some wounds take time to heal." "I understand," Eleanor nodded sympathetically. "Although, I must say, they haven't been in the best shape lately, especially his wife. Heather, I think? I hear she's having problems at the newspaper. Something to do with her work methods." "Really?" I feigned surprise. I hadn't heard about that. "Oh, it's all rumors, of course." Eleanor leaned closer. "But where there's smoke, there's fire, isn't there? In any case, they don't appear in public as often as they used to." I continued chatting with Eleanor for a while longer, then excused myself and moved on through the hall. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Ethan and Heather had entered and were now standing at the bar. Heather was looking around nervously, as if checking to see who was paying attention to them. Ethan was slowly sipping his whiskey, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. I stopped at a stand with information about the hospital's charitable projects. Robert Mortimer, editor-in-chief of the Herald, was standing nearby. "Judge Barlow," he nodded at me. "Good to see you here." "Likewise, Robert," I shook his hand. "How's your newspaper? I hear you've had some internal problems." Mortimer glanced quickly at Heather, who was standing far enough away that she couldn't hear our conversation. "Nothing serious," he said cautiously. "Just the usual editorial issues." "Of course," I smiled knowingly. "By the way, I'd like to thank you for taking my comments seriously. It shows your professionalism as an editor." Mortimer paled slightly. "No need to thank me," he said quietly. "I'm just doing my job. If you'll excuse me." He walked away, clearly feeling uncomfortable. I noticed him glance at Heather again, this time more appraisingly, as if reconsidering his opinion of her. The official part of the evening began with a speech by the mayor, followed by the hospital's chief physician, who talked about plans to expand the pediatric ward. After that, the fundraising began. Guests were invited to approach a special table where they could make their contribution and receive a commemorative charity pin. I noticed that Ethan and Heather were keeping to themselves. Heather was whispering something heatedly in her husband's ear, her face expressing discontent. Ethan nodded, but without enthusiasm, his gaze wandering around the room. After donating a substantial amount and receiving a gold philanthropist pin, I headed for the podium, where the mayor was talking to members of the city council. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Judge Barlow," he exclaimed, extending his hand. "What an honor! We so rarely see you at city events." "Age, George," I shook his hand. "I prefer quiet evenings at home. But today you made an exception, and we are glad." The mayor turned to his companions. "Gentlemen, I think you all know Judge Barlow, a legend in our city." There followed an exchange of handshakes and pleasantries. I noticed that some of those present were glancing at Ethan and Heather, then back at me, clearly pondering our family conflict. "Judge Barlow," the mayor said after a short pause, We were just discussing the issue of public speaking engagements. We have several planned, but I think your words would be especially valuable to those present. Could you say a few words about the importance of supporting local institutions such as our hospital? It was unexpected, but it fit perfectly into my plan. Speaking in front of the entire Morgantown community, including Ethan and Heather, I couldn't have imagined a better opportunity for the final chord of my revenge. Of course, George, I nodded with a slight smile. It would be my honor. The mayor led me to the microphone and introduced me to the audience. The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I noticed Ethan tense up, and Heather grabbed his arm as if to keep him from running away. Ladies and gentlemen, I began scanning the room. It is a great honor for me to address you today. Morgantown is a city to which I have devoted 43 years of my life as a judge, and even more as a citizen. I paused, allowing the words to sink in. We are gathered here today to support our hospital, an institution that serves all of us, regardless of status, wealth, or position. It reminds me of the fundamental values upon which our society is built: justice, honesty, loyalty. My gaze fell on Ethan and Heather. They stood motionless, like rabbits before a snake. In my judicial practice, I have encountered many cases where these values have been betrayed, where personal gain was placed above the common good, where ambition and the thirst for recognition overshadowed honor and decency. I saw Heather swallow nervously. Ethan looked at me, his face pale. But I have also seen how betrayal and deception ultimately turn against those who commit them, how false reputations crumble under the weight of the truth, how society rejects those who violate its unwritten laws. A whisper ran through the room. Many guessed that my words had a double meaning, even though I didn't name names. Family, and I continued, is the first society in which we learn these values, where we learn the price of loyalty and the bitterness of betrayal, where we understand that our actions have consequences, sometimes far-reaching and unpredictable. I paused again, watching the audience's reaction. Many nodded, some glanced at Ethan and Heather, who looked like they wanted to sink through the floor. When family ties are broken, I continued, it's not just a personal tragedy. It's a crack in the foundation of society. Renouncing your father is not just words spoken in anger. It is a rejection of your own roots, of the wisdom of past generations, of the heritage we all carry. Now the whole room understood what I was talking about. Eyes shifted between me and the couple by the far wall. But even when we are betrayed, my voice grew quieter, forcing people to strain to hear. We must not respond in kind. We must restore justice, but not seek revenge. We must reveal the truth, but not humiliate. This is the lesson I have learned from my many years on the bench. I saw Heather whispering nervously to Ethan. He shook his head, his gaze fixed on my face. And today, by donating to our hospital's good cause, we are all demonstrating that the values of our community, mutual aid, support, honesty, are still alive in Morgantown. That we can look each other in the eye without shame or fear. That we understand, in a small town like ours, reputation is everything, and once lost, it is rarely fully restored. I glanced around the quiet hall, pausing for a moment on the faces of the key figures in Morgantown society. The mayor, the newspaper editor, the chief physician, major businessmen, and lawyers. They all understood what I was talking about, even if I didn't mention any names. Thank you for your attention, I concluded. And remember, justice may be slow, but it is inevitable. The hall erupted in applause. I stepped down from the podium to cheers and handshakes. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Ethan and Heather quickly heading for the exit, trying to leave the event unnoticed. Eleanor Pritchard approached me, her eyes shining with excitement. "Milo, that was amazing," she said, squeezing my hand. "Such a powerful speech, and so meaningful, if you know what I mean." "I just shared some thoughts I've gathered over a long life," I replied modestly. "Your son and daughter-in-law seem to have left in a hurry," she remarked, nodding toward the exit. "Perhaps your words struck a nerve." "Perhaps," I agreed. "The truth is often uncomfortable." The rest of the evening passed for me in a glow of attention and respect. People came up to express their admiration for my speech, to share memories of my career as a judge, or simply to shake my hand. I felt like I was back in the days when my word carried weight, when my presence in a room changed its atmosphere. Leaving the town hall late in the evening, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: satisfaction at having accomplished my plan, bitterness at the rift with my son, and, unexpectedly, a slight sadness. Revenge was sweet, but it had a taste of ashes. Patrick caught up with me on the street. "Milo," he put his hand on my shoulder. "You did it, didn't you? All of it. Ethan's problems at the firm, Heather's troubles at the newspaper. It's all you're doing." I looked at my old friend for a long time. "Justice, Pat," I said finally. "It was always about justice." He shook his head, but in his eyes I saw not condemnation, but a kind of respect. "Remind me never to be your enemy, you old devil," he said with a crooked smile. "Want a ride?" I declined his offer, preferring to walk. Morgantown was quiet and peaceful at night, as was my soul now that the deed was done. Ethan and Heather had learned a lesson that I hoped they would remember for a long time. Their social status, which they valued so much, had been undermined. Their careers, on which they had staked so much, had suffered. And their reputations, so fragile in a small town, had been seriously tarnished. Justice had prevailed, and although the price was high, a complete break with my only son, I did not regret my decision. Some lessons must be learned, even if they are painful. I walked home with my head held high, as befits a judge who has restored justice.